next up, we have Dr. Scott Engel, who is the director of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Scott was sworn in as the third director of NIFA on October 29, 2018. He previously served as Dean and Director of the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences at the University of Georgia. And prior to that, he served as Professor of Soil Science and an Administrator at the University of Maryland. Thank you, Dr. Engel.
Okay, well, thank you. Tara, let me know if no one can hear me or if I'm showing up well. Having a little bit of trouble getting my presentation to advance.
We can hear you.
Okay, hold on. Apologize for this. Let me exit out and start over. Okay. National Institute of Food and Agriculture, this is a very significant part of the USDA that helps support teaching, research, and extension for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the federal government. This is an important mission for a number of reasons, the most probably significant of which is that I think a lot of you understand that we have to double the production of food on this planet over the next 30 years. There's no more land, there's no more water, there will be probably fewer resources applied to the land in order to protect the environment. And therefore, we're going to have to do this with less water, less resources, and less land. And the only way we can do that is through technology. And technology, which is research, teaching, and extension, to share that information with the people who are growing our food. So it's critically important that NIFA is successful in its mission. If we are successful, people will have enough to eat on this planet. And if we don't, if we're not successful, there are going to be some very serious issues. And as one of the most important research organizations in agriculture in the world, our mission, again, is critical to our future as a planet. NIFA invests in three primary different areas. The first would be research. This is research as you know it, where we will provide funding to primarily universities, but also NGOs, small businesses as well, even occasionally individuals, to support research that can develop technologies to help grow more food, to help improve the environment, to help families, to help children be successful, or help businesses be successful, but generally all around the agricultural area. The second focus of the mission would be teaching, because obviously we need to train the next generation of those who will both grow our food, but also develop new technologies. And then the third one is a fairly interesting part that not all of you may be familiar with. This would be extension. And this is where we take information primarily from universities, and it is transferred at the state level to those who need it. So it can be a farmer, but it can also be a youth. Extension is responsible for managing the 4-H program. Nationally, we are a strong partner with the 4-H Council as well as state programs to help develop programs and fund some of the work that we do. And other types of information there that are required throughout our country, again, to fulfill the mission that I previously mentioned. At the bottom there, it's a little hard to see, but that's a map of the United States. There are three types of universities in this country that we primarily support. Now, not exclusively so, because there's still lots of other universities that would not be considered, quote, land grant, that are supported. But we have, first of all, the 1862 universities. So this would be in your area, the University of Missouri or the Kansas State University, University of Georgia, where I used to work. We also have 1890 institutions. These are also historical institutions. In Missouri, it would be the University of Missouri at Pine Bluff, a very good university there. And then there are some newer universities that have been added to our portfolio. These are called the 1894 universities. These would be considered tribal colleges, typically on tribal land, tribal nations, but we also support and provide significant funding to those schools. So who are we? We are a federal agency that, as I said, provides funding from and as appropriated by Congress to those who can conduct teaching, research, and extension. We were created by the Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008, although support for research and extension went far back beyond that in various other iterations of what we now call NIFA. NIFA has a relatively large budget, almost $1.8 billion. Of this, about half of it is used to support competitive funds. And I'm going to describe more about that in just a minute. But that's where proposals are sent in, we review them, and then we make decisions. The other half of the funding is distributed through what we call capacity funding. And this is where there has been a formula established by Congress that directs certain amounts of money to each university or each state to support the programs, teaching, research, or extension within those areas. As you've already heard, our mission is agricultural research, education, and extension. And they all really tie in together, and they're important that they are considered. We talk about it as a three-legged stool, and in just a minute, you're going to see more about why that is. Our vision is to catalyze transformative discoveries, to educate people about those discoveries and train the next generation to keep that loop going, and to engage and to address other agricultural challenges. And that would be akin to translation or extension. So just a quick note, you've already heard this from Dr. Weinberg. We were primarily located in Washington, D.C. in the waterfront building down close to the Potomac River. We have recently moved to Pennsylvania Avenue in Kansas City. The building is literally being built out as we speak, and hopefully by later on this year, we'll be able to move into it. But just like with ERS, as we move from Washington, D.C. to Kansas, we moved most of our employees. We've only left, in fact, less than 20 employees have remained in Washington, D.C., myself and a few others. Everyone else has gone to Kansas City. But as a result of the move, and just like with ERS, a lot of our employees, especially the more experienced ones, chose not to make that move. In fact, we lost about 80% of our entire workforce. And so we have been hiring, and we will continue to hire for the foreseeable future to replace people for those that we have lost. And we're hiring people at the senior scientist level, and pretty much for every conceivable area. We need communicators, and we need HR specialists, and we need business people and civil rights specialists, and we need scientists, but we particularly need business people to help manage the money. I'm gonna talk in here in a few minutes about the process that we used, and maybe you can see where you might fit into that process, but getting money out the door is one of the most critical parts of everything that we do. So this is how we function. First of all, Congress, working with the administration, and as influenced by our stakeholders and partners, so these could be universities, they could be businesses, they can be individuals who have gone to Washington, D.C. to advocate for a particular program that they think is critical for this nation. And so on the competitive side, this is how it works. Again, that's about half of all the funding that we distribute from NIFA. So we will issue what we call requests for applications, an RFA. This is where we have identified an area that has a need. And as a result of that, our scientists, talking to our partners and stakeholders, will then form this request that will provide detail to those who are interested in submitting a proposal to help address the questions that we have raised in that RFA. So the applications are received. They are then reviewed. This is a competitive process. It's essentially the gold standard for how decisions are made in science. It's reviewed by peers, also with stakeholders on many of our panels to assure that we are studying things that are important to the people who are impacted by these technologies. It's an anonymous process, and we have some of the best scientists sitting on these panels to help make decisions. These scientists are also not able to have submitted a proposal to that program during that particular year. So as I said, it's the gold standard. It's never a perfect process, but it's the best anyone has ever, it's the best process that anyone has developed. for making the best decisions about which projects are most meritorious for funding. So once that decision is made and they have been signed off, we then begin to provide the funds. And this is where it gets complicated because, as you might suspect, when you are distributing many, many hundreds of millions of dollars to many, many partners throughout the United States, including our territories, it's a very, very complicated and complex process. So we have to work within the federal government as directed by Congress, and then work with our partners who all have a little bit of a different way of doing business. And so this is often a one-on-one process where we work with our partners to get the funds provided to them. There's also a financial management and oversight to this. Obviously, we need to make sure, because the taxpayers demand it, that these funds are used appropriately and for the purpose for which they were obligated to those organizations. And then lastly, we have to assure that the work has had an impact on those that initially asked for that research to be conducted. Because why conduct research if it doesn't have a positive impact on the communities that it was intended to support? So that's a whole science unto itself. How do you judge the impact of research? There's obviously short-term impact, but probably more importantly, what is the long-term impact of that research? And how do we know that it has made our country, our community, our world better as a result of what has been supported? And then lastly, the impact there in the bottom right that shows you that we do transfer that information to the producers, to the processors, to the consumers. We are probably one of the best agencies in the federal government for making sure that the research that is supported really has impact upon the entire community. Hold on here. Well, okay, I want to get back a little bit to research, education, and extension. I've already mentioned what they are. Research is where you provide answers to complex issues. Education is where you strengthen schools to train the next generation. And then lastly, extension is where you deliver that research information to those who need it. But it's really the nexus of these three where the greatest impact is made. You would see this most often on a land-grant university. Again, in your area, that would be the University of Missouri, Haskell Indians, All Indian Nation in Kansas, University of K-State, or University of Missouri Pine Bluff. But it's the nexus of those three areas where we see the greatest impacts to our society. We have a number then we have a lot of other programs under that.
You're going in and out just a little bit. You know, while you were just frozen there for just a second, can you enlarge this screen a little bit? Go up here and hit the slideshow view, the little E screen there.
Yeah, Bill, it's not working. I've tried that several times now.
Okay. From current slide.
There you go. Let me get down. Okay. Can you hear me now, Bill?
Yes, and if you could, just make sure that you're speaking into your microphone. Your connection is going in and out just a little bit.
Okay, thanks. These are the programs that are supported by NIFA. AFRI at the top there, that is by far our largest program. It's our foundational research program where some of the cutting edge, very futuristic research that's going to be supporting agriculture, families, businesses, the environment for many years to come is complete. And then you can see as you move down there, we have a lot of other programs. Some are capacity programs, again, that are funded through our formula. Some are on the competitive side. A lot of them are fairly large, but when you get to the bottom of the list there, you can see that we also have some very, very small programs. But those small programs require just as much work. So if we're distributing $400 million through AFRI or $5 million through one of the programs at the bottom there, you still have to develop that RFA, and you still have to have a panel to review those proposals. and you still have to get the money out to partners that will receive that, and you still have to account for the impacts and the outcomes of that research. So there is disproportionate effort devoted to the smaller programs. But as you can see, the main point of this is that there are a lot of programs, and every one of them requires a considerable amount of effort. So here again is a description of both our capacity and competitive programs. Capacity programs are found in research and extension, not in the teaching area. It goes for the 1862s, the 1890 schools, and the tribal 1994 schools. The funds, as I noted, are divided up on a formulaic basis. These formulas are long-standing, occasionally revised, but they will determine how much funding is provided to each state. And this is very much a partnership model where it is the federal system, the state, as well as local partnerships. And I'll give you an example of this. Many of your extension offices, there are extension offices in almost every county of the United States, and those offices are typically supported by local county funds, state funds, and federal funds. And that's where you get a lot of the, when we talk about the three-legged stool, that's also where it becomes evident that we have many of these groups working together. On the competitive side, this is for research, extension again, education, and we also have something called the integrated account. This is an important area for the future, particularly where we try to make sure that research, extension, and education, at least two of the three, are working together to support that particular project. There is varying eligibility, some for land grant universities only, where others have wide applicability to NGOs, to sometimes even private individuals, to private small businesses. So it's important to understand these programs because they all are just a little bit different. Here are a couple examples of some big ones and small ones. Our AFRI grant, which is our broad and foundational grant. That's where a lot of the very important technologies that have allowed agriculture to produce more food and to reduce the impact of the environment have come from. Our Specialty Crop Research Initiative, this is SCRI. These would be for crops that are more specific. They're not the major commodity crops like corn, soybeans, or beef cattle. And they're just an example of a small program. There's an alfalfa program that targets very specific projects and specific needs within that community that's responsible for research, extension, and teaching on alfalfa. Here's a little more how it works. And again, I hope all of you and a lot of you can see a place for you on this. We support the entire system for producing food in this country. And it goes all the way back to making sure that we have the human capital available, the systems in place to allow production, not just on our farms, but in businesses as well. So if you glide upward to that, you'll see that what is produced on the farm then goes into the food processing and distribution system. And if you go down to the bottom, you see that there are feedstocks, processing, and distribution. This would include things like feeds for animals and more of the commodity type crops that also might go into things like biofuels, for example. That's a big part of what we do. It's a big part of agriculture for this country. When we think about agriculture, we always think about the top half there and the food that we produce and the food that we consume. But a big part of the agricultural economy, again, is on the downside there to the feedstocks that support other parts of the rural economy. So here again, I want to get back to how we do our work. Request applications, we receive proposals, we review the proposals, we provide funds, we provide oversight for those funds during their use, we assess the impact and the outcome of that research, and then we make sure that the consumers and the producers and the families and the youth through 4-H are benefiting from that. All of these functions support one another, and so there is a loop here that is continually running. So as we look at the outcome of a particular program, we will then assess, was that successful or was it not? Not all research is successful. Some research fails. That's the nature of research. Research is risky. It's hypothesis driven. We hope the hypotheses are true, but they are not always true. So if it's not successful, then we regroup and we rewind again. What did we learn from that failed research? What are the lessons? And how can we make the next request for applications better? And so then we go through that entire process again the next year, or if it's on a five-year cycle, along that time frame. But it's a system that has worked really well for NIFA for over a decade now, and in fact, going back with other iterations of NIFA, a couple of decades beyond that. But as I said, it is literally the gold standard for how we support research, and we're very proud to be able to use it for agricultural research in the United States. So your questions are, who are we hiring? Just like ERS, we are hiring all kinds of leaders, managers, specialists, those with expertise in all kinds of different areas. So certainly scientists. We need young scientists who are just out of school. They will have a role in the system. We need scientists who have been in at a university or in a private company or working for another government agency for a long time that bring in a different level of experience. We certainly have a lot of needs for those that work on the financial side of the organization. So how we get the money transferred and how do we monitor the use of that money by our partners. So accountants, policy specialists, are we and our partners following the appropriate policies that have been established either internally or by Congress for us. We need lots of administrative support professionals at all levels. We need grants and financial management experts. That's again, that's a very important part of what we do. We need communications experts, we need data scientists, and we need managers and leaders. And within the spectrum of those that work in science, we need all areas. We don't just need animal scientists or plant scientists, which would be the traditional groups that we work with. We're hiring economists right now. We're hiring social scientists. We are hiring environmental scientists and those that have an interest in the environment. We're hiring those that have a background in youth and social management. So again, as you think about, do you have a place within NIFA, think very, very broadly, because don't just assume it's the traditional areas of plant, soil, and animal sciences. It's far, far beyond that. And our imaginations are big as we think about who may be useful to the organization. I will hope that you will think big as well as you consider a career with NIFA.
Hi, Scott. I think that you froze up again, and I'm going to, kind of follow up on some of the things that Scott just said. We're a part of the Kansas City area right now, and we couldn't be happier about that. And we've already done some hiring in the area. We started out with some of our financial management and accounting folks. We started out with the first flush of national program leaders. We hired some program specialists. We were in dire need of grants management folks. But the one thing that I want to leave you with today, in addition to the questions and answers, is that the National Institute of Food and Agriculture is in Kansas City for good. And I joined the federal government 18 years ago because part of the reason for that was I looked at the demographics, and I looked at how many baby boomers are and are still in the federal government. And, you know, I just saw a tremendous potential to number one, make a difference, and number two, to advance within the organization. I joined as a program specialist with a master's degree and a few years of experience. I qualified as a GS-12. I know that's an individual by individual type of decision making that Collie Willis's group will get into. You know, where you will qualify and where you'll fit. Where you'll grade out. But you know, some of the accountants that we just hired are going to be moving up, and you know, due to you know, that we need people in higher levels. The fact that we need people in a those people are going to move on, and there's a lot of mobility right now, not just in NIFA, but in the entire federal government. And so there are going to be, you know, even though you don't see the opportunities today on some of our USA Jobs accounts, you will. You know, you'll be seeing them in the very near future. I see Scott's back. Scott, would you? I think that there's probably some questions that Tara has. Would you like me to log off, or would you like me to join you for the Q&A?
Why don't you join me? Bill, I'm sorry, my internet seems to be unstable today, so I've joined you on my phone.
Yes.
It happens.
Thank you both. So it just shows how flexible we are, and thank you, Bill, for jumping in, and thank you, Scott, for the presentation. So please submit your questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And Scott, I do have some questions for you already.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. It says, what need does NIFA have for people with research backgrounds in basic or applied agricultural science?
Well, as far as we can tell at this point, unlimited need. We have not nearly hired enough scientists, even though we've been hiring for over 6 months now. We have not nearly hired enough scientists to support any of these areas in the basic or applied agricultural sciences. And again, I would define that very, very broadly. We will be hiring certainly over the next couple of months aggressively in this area. We'll probably go through another hiring tranche later on this summer. That may be a little more targeted at that point. We've opened up our applications very broadly. We're hoping to get lots of good people in lots of different areas. We never know who will apply or who will be hired. So we're hoping for the best at this point. We will analyze where we are once we get through this current tranche that is being kicked off by the job fair. And then we'll have another effort later on this summer to try to fill in some of the gaps.
And I'll just add that we have a continuous open application vacancy for our national program leader. And the folks that usually fill those positions are people who are either mid or late career, or sometimes early career, from universities. Sometimes they're scientists from land-grant universities. And that is, as Scott said, that is across the spectrum of what we more broadly call agriculture. That includes forestry. That includes environmental sciences, in addition to cows and plows and soil thermometers and mass spectrometers. So it's a very broad vacancy listing, and I would expect after that, maybe somebody who's not quite at that level in their career, we're probably going to be opening up some opportunities for program specialists who will kind of work at the side of those national program leaders to execute our programs on that RFA development, application review, and generally being interfacing with the land-grant university system. It's really exciting right now.
So we don't know the, the status of the person who asked that question, but if you're right out of school, these are not hard and fast rules, but generally you're looking at a program specialist, and you'll see some of these announced over the course of the next couple of weeks. And if you're a more established senior person who's been working in government, academia, industry, then you might want to look at a national program leader.
Okay, thank you. It says, Scott, here you mentioned you had positions for people who work with youth. Can you tell more about these positions, please?
Sure. Well, 4-H is the largest and probably the most prominent youth development program in the United States. Some states have very, very large 4-H programs. Others have moderate ones, but every state has a significant 4-H program. This is where we get into the federal, the state, the local, and even to some extent private support, because there are many, many volunteers that work in 4-H. We support 4-H in a couple different ways. First of all, we provide funding to 4-H programs in some of the areas that we talked about earlier. So that can be either as competitive or capacity funding, but that goes to the land grant university, one of the 112 land grants around the country, where they have already stood up a 4-H program, and they hire 4-H specialists within that program. But there you are a university or occasionally a local county employee that would be the 4-H youth leader. So we provide some of the funding for those individuals that work at the state level. But we also have a 4-H program within NIFA. These are the ones who receive the proposals and make decisions about funding and make decisions about what is most appropriate to fund and help get the money out the door. So whether it's working for NIFA in Kansas City or working for your local land grant university in your home state, there are plenty of these opportunities for you. You just need to decide, are you looking to come to Kansas City and work for NIFA, or would you rather stay in a state and be a 4-H specialist or a 4-H agent, 4-H faculty, whatever they might call them.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. What NPL, National Program Leaders, positions are you still looking to fill?
Well, at this point, because we have not nearly hired enough people, we would like to see applicants in all areas. And we know that applicants, sometimes you can cross over from one area to another. Most people who have spent a lot of time studying are somewhat cross-disciplinary. So we would like to see what your skills are and where they might match up with some of our needs. You certainly, if after you have looked at the website to see where those broadly based positions are advertised, you may even want to call someone in NIFA and talk about more specifically what might be available. But at this point, because we are hiring so many people in so many areas, I'd hate to discourage anyone from applying, because we may see a skill in you. Maybe it wasn't the department you trained in, but maybe you're a plant scientist, but you have a lot of expertise in animal science. So we may find that those cross-disciplinary skills, which are important to us because we also need cross-disciplinary experts within NIFA, but you probably ought to talk to us before deciding that there's just something's not appropriate for you.
I would apply, because, if you're a plant scientist, really what we're in dire need of is a sustainable agriculture leader to run our sustainable agriculture program. We need youth practitioners. We need animal scientists. We need people who are either, if it's not their training, sometimes how their discipline impacts the environment. We need it. So really, I would encourage anyone that thinks that they would like to lead national programs to apply.
All right, here's another question. what is the split of time between research, education, and extension? So I guess how you balance that is maybe what they're asking.
Well, for us, it's not really a balance of time because our programs in research, teaching, and education are, we really look at the split between funding and how much money goes into support direct research, how much money supports extension, and how much money supports teaching. So we would look at it in a bit of a different way, but as you heard Dr. Hoffman just say, it's become a lot more complicated than that. It used to be, when I was in school a long time ago, single disciplinary teams worked on very specific problems. All of those, I hate to call them simple problems, but we've solved all those. And everything that's left for the future generation are much more complex, are going to require interdisciplinary teams to find those complex solutions. So the lines between teaching, research, and extension have all been somewhat blurred over the last 10 or 15 years. So I probably couldn't even answer that question for you. And it's probably a good thing that we can't answer that question. As I said earlier in that, the slide of teaching, research, and extension, I said it's where each of those areas intersect where the greatest impact is made. That still is true. And that's where you need people who are comfortable with a foot or a hand in all three of those different areas.
Thank you very much. So I just want to remind everyone that we will answer the rest of the questions through our FAQ. And at this time, Scott, we have to move on to Willis Colley. So thank you to both you and Bill. Dr. Engel, thank you very much for the presentation.
You're welcome.